Hello and welcome along to today's webinar, An Employer's Guide to Annual Leave. My name is Rachel Lamsley and I'm a Senior Employment Law Advisor here at Ellis Whittam. So before we get starting, a little bit of housekeeping. To listen to today's webinar, please use your computer speakers. If you have any questions at all, please do just pop them in the questions box. And if you're having any trouble at all accessing the webinar today, then please pop the query in the questions box and I'll be able to come back to you after the event. So for those who are a little unfamiliar with Ellis Whittam, we provide high quality fixed fee employment law and health and safety advice. We employ qualified solicitors and health and safety advisors who develop one-to-one relationships with our clients as we provide you with a named advisor to help you along your HR and health and safety journey. We don't just advise, we provide hands-on support. And we can help you with a range of additional services to help you along your way. We're currently supporting more than 17,500 UK employers, from startups to national brands, and we really are experts in our field. We currently have some excellent client satisfaction rates as well, something that we're really proud of here at EW. So what are we going to be taking a look at today? Well, we'll have a look at should you have an annual leave policy in place, how much annual leave are employees actually entitled to, how is annual leave accrued, we'll have a look at what can be carried over, and multiple annual leave requests. We will also take a look at whether or not you can refuse holiday requests or cancel pre-approved leave. We'll take a look at annual leave and sickness absence. Finally, we'll have a look at calculating annual leave, and we'll have some things for you to take away with you after the event. Everything I'm going to discuss today is actually within our Employer's Definitive Guide to Annual Leave, which will be in the email follow-up after the event. So don't worry too much about scrolling down all of the information that we chat through, because everything will be available in there for you. So let's get started then. The starting point should be whether or not you've got an annual leave policy in place. Now, every organisation should have workplace rules regarding annual leave. Now, these will typically be found in the employee's contract of employment or employee handbook. So let's take a look at entitlement first. It is a legal requirement to provide written details regarding holiday entitlement, and you should specify how many days of leave the employee is entitled to and whether it includes bank holidays. It's also important to make clear to employees starting in the middle of the year the amount of holiday they're entitled to, which will be proportionate to the amount of days remaining in that leave year. Now, what about booking? Well, in your policy you should reiterate that all annual leave must be agreed in advance with line managers. This will prevent employees from booking their holidays and making commitments without first having obtained authorization, something that's really important. You should also consider the limits associated with it. For example, might you consider laying down how many consecutive working days can be booked? For example, 10 days, and perhaps how many people can be off at the same time. What about your procedure and notice? You should specify how much notice the employee must provide when booking annual leave so that they know quite clearly what is expected of them. We should also consider identifying what your leave year is. In your policy, make clear what that is. For example, it could be a calendar year, 1st of January to the 31st of December, or perhaps the fiscal year, 1st of April to the 31st of March, or it could be from when the employee started working with you. My expert tip here is try and make this easy for yourself and have everybody on the same leave year. Also think about whether or not you should mention carryover in your policy. If you're going to, you should specify your rules for carrying over untaken holiday entitlement from one annual leave year to another. Think about also the restrictions. Explain that your managers may refuse a request for leave if it would result in the workplace being understaffed or otherwise negatively affected. You may also, on providing reasonable notice, require the employee to take leave at certain times of year, or perhaps refrain from taking leave during certain busy periods. Finally, think about how you're going to deal with leave at the end of employment. You should clearly state that employees who leave their employment during the course of a holiday year will be entitled to a pro rata payment reflecting leave accrued but not taken. Where an employee has, at the time their employee ends, taken a large proportion of their leave entitlement, then a deduction can be made from their final payment of salary to reflect the holiday which has been taken but not accrued. Don't forget though, that is clearly there is a need there for us to have a right to deduct from that individual's pay, so make sure that's dealt with within the contract of employment. So moving on then, how much annual leave are employees entitled to? Well, all workers are entitled to annual leave, and that includes employees but does exclude self-employed. Full-time employees have the right to 5.6 weeks or 28 days of paid annual leave per year. The first 20 days of leave are provided by European law, and the additional 8 days are prescribed by the UK working time regulations. Employees can provide more generous allowances than those provided by statute, but we certainly can't be providing anything less. Those working part-time are entitled to the same amount of holiday as full-time employees, but their entitlement is calculated on a pro rata basis. Their entitlement is calculated by multiplying the number of days worked per week by 5.6. For example, if an employee works 3 days a week, they'll be entitled to 16.8 days of annual paid leave a year. In some cases, employees work different hours each week. For example, a worker on a 0 hours contract in the retail sector may work 40 hours a week in the run-up to Christmas, but once the festive season has ended, their hours may fluctuate greatly week to week. The easiest way to determine the holiday entitlement for those on 0 hours contracts, or perhaps even irregular, is by calculating it on the basis of the hours that they actually worked. The holiday entitlement of 5.6 weeks is equivalent to 12.07% of the hours that they've worked. Therefore, if they've worked 12 hours, they have the right to 1 hour and 27 minutes. My expert tip here is if you're in doubt as to how much leave somebody is entitled to, do seek advice from your employment law advisor here at EW, because we're very much used to calculating these for you. Another area for you to have a think about is bank holidays. Generally, bank holidays are counted as part of the statutory 5.6 weeks. And remember, the law doesn't provide employees with a statutory right to take time off for bank holidays. Whether they're required to work or not will depend on the terms of the contract. The employee's contract may say something along the lines of that in addition to all bank and public holidays, the employee is entitled to X amount working days of holiday. Alternatively, the contract may say that the employee's annual leave entitlement is X days and is inclusive of bank and public holidays. Although in many cases employers do grant employees time off on bank holidays, the nature of some organisations means that it is essential that employees work to meet business or operational demands, for example in the case of retail, transport or public services. Employers are under no obligation to pay an employee extra for working on a bank holiday, but an employee may be entitled to this if it's stated within their contract of employment or based on customary arrangements. For example, the employer may decide to pay the employee time and a half or double time for working on a bank holiday, and that may well be a long-standing practice. So how is annual leave accrued? Well, there is a dangerous assumption that an employee does not have any rights until they successfully completed their probationary period. This just isn't true. Statutory rights will depend on length of service, not whether or not they've passed their probationary period. Annual leave is a right that is accrued from the employee's first day of employment. This means that as soon as they start their job with an employer, their entitlement to annual leave starts to accrue and therefore starts to build up. During that first year of employment, employers may decide to use an accrual system to calculate the employee's holiday entitlement. In each month, the employee will accrue 1/12 of their full annual leave entitlement. If they begin a job perhaps midway through the year, they will have the right to only the proportion of the 5.6 weeks annual leave, which is equal to how much of the holiday year remains. They will receive their whole annual leave entitlement once the new annual leave year commences, subject to the accrual system referred to above. Alternatively, employers may wish to give their employees pro-rata holiday entitlement up front without the need for them to accrue it during that first year. Now, what about accrual on 0 hours contracts? If an individual is on a 0 hours contract and is, say, on an umbrella contract, i.e. that where they remain an employee or worker when they're not working, they're going to accrue leave during the entire duration of the contract, whether they're working or not. However, if an individual is on separate and severable assignments, their annual leave entitlement will only accrue whilst they're working. To avoid a whole host of obligations, it should be drafted in the contract that each offer of work should be treated as an entirely separate and severable assignment. However, that's really got to reflect the true position, as a tribunal will be entitled to look behind those terms if they don't think that that's the reality. Just remember, statutory holidays and entitlement will continue to accrue whilst an employee is off work sick or on maternity leave. Now, can employees carry over untaken annual leave? Employees must take at least 4 weeks of their leave per year. If an employee receives 28 days leave, then they can carry over up to a maximum of 8 days. The terms regarding carrying over leave should be included in the terms of the employment contract or the employee handbook. If the employer provides a more generous holiday entitlement than the statutory minimum, you may allow the employee to carry over any extra leave depending on what is laid down in that contract or handbook. If an employee has been unable to take annual leave because they are on leave for different reasons, say for example they're off work due to maternity, they can carry over their unused leave to the next year. Just be aware that the case law from the European Court of Justice states that it will constitute discrimination based on sex if a woman were to lose her right to statutory annual leave due to going on maternity leave. Therefore, employers will need to ask employees to use their annual leave before going on maternity leave, or allow them to carry it over and perhaps take when they return. An employer must allow the employee to carry over up to 20 days if they've actually been off sick and couldn't take their leave. It can be carried forward for up to 18 months from the end of the holiday year when the leave was due to be taken. So, how should you allocate leave and manage multiple requests? Well, it's certainly an area that we get asked a lot about. The law lays down that employees must take at least 20 days off during the holiday year, but it does not give employees an automatic right to choose when they take that leave. When an employee wishes to take time off, they need to make the request according to your own company procedure and notice, which should be found, as I say, in your employee handbook. For example, you may ask the employees to complete a form and give it to their line manager, or ask them to submit a request through the company's intranet system. They will also need to respect notice periods. Generally, employees should provide you with notice which is at least twice as long as the leave that they are requesting. This means that if they request 1 week of leave, they should provide you with at least 2 weeks' notice. Remember, an employer is within their rights to provide notice to an employee that they are to take leave on a particular day that suits the business. In order for this to occur, the employer must provide notice to the employee that is twice as long as the leave they wish to enforce. Most employers opt for an approach whereby leave is granted on a first-come, first-served basis. In your policy, it's useful to include that there may be exceptions to that first-come, first-served basis to ensure that holiday is spread out perhaps throughout the year and on a fair and equitable basis. There will be some times of year when it's extremely popular. For example, Easter, half-term, summer and Christmas. And so if you're dealing with numerous requests, here are some top tips. If your organisation is open all year round with no seasonal shutdowns, you could also consider allowing people to choose between time off at Christmas and summer. So if someone doesn't get the time off they requested at Christmas, they'll be given priority at booking their summer holiday. In your workplace rules, you can impose limits on how many consecutive days of leave an employee may take at one time. This stops your valuable members of staff extending periods of time away from the business. Think about encouraging collaboration. For employees who are parents, they will be particularly keen to have time off during perhaps half terms and the long summer break. Therefore, you might encourage teams to collaborate with each other and coordinate leave. This will ensure operational requirements are met and issues are quickly resolved. Why don't you periodically review whether employees have taken leave? If they've got lots of leave still to take, remind them of how much leave they have before the holiday year comes to an end. And don't forget, be fair and consistent in the way that you allocate the requests. So, can I refuse holiday requests or cancel pre-approved leave? Well, employers can refuse a request for holiday on specific dates or cancel leave that has already been approved. If, for example, a number of employees in the same team or department want to take leave at the same time, you'll need to think about whether it is viable to grant all of the requests. You might need to reject one or two of the requests to make sure that the business demands are met and that you're not placing too much burden on other employees to carry out the work. To say no to a request, you must give the employee counter notice, and the length of that notice must be equivalent to the period of leave that the employee was trying to book. It is also possible that you oblige employees to take annual leave at certain times of year. As I said earlier, it might be a Christmas close down. Alternatively, there might be times when you decide to prohibit employees taking annual leave, perhaps at particularly busy times when you require all hands on deck. As I say, you might find yourself in a situation where you have to cancel that approved annual leave. For instance, a big project with a very tight deadline has come in and you need all hands on deck to get it completed on time. The law does allow an employer to cancel an employee's annual leave that you've previously approved. To do this, you must provide the appropriate amount of notice. The rule is that the length of notice must be equivalent to the period of leave that the employee planned to take. This means that if an employee was due to take a week of holiday and you wish to cancel it, you must provide a minimum of a week's notice. Just a word of warning. Before cancelling any leave, you should think about the options available to you. It's important to make sure that before cancelling leave, you have a clear business reason and only do it if absolutely necessary. If you cancel someone's leave, which means that they can't take a booked holiday and they suffer financial loss, they might be able to argue that there's been a breach of the implied duty of mutual trust and confidence and perhaps try and claim constructive dismissal. You also need to be aware that you mustn't cancel annual leave if it means that the employee cannot take their full statutory annual leave entitlement in that leave year. So, how do you deal with annual leave and sickness issues? There are many times when annual leave and sickness collide, which brings up a whole host of new issues for employers to deal with. What happens then if an employee falls sick when they're on annual leave? Well, cases by the European Court of Justice have held that if an employee becomes sick before or during a prearranged holiday, they are entitled to postpone their annual leave to another date. This may mean that they need to carry it over to the next holiday year. And it applies to the first 4 weeks laid down in Europe, not the additional 1.6 weeks. If an employee does fall sick whilst on annual leave, you can ask them to report sickness absence in line with your own reporting requirements. You can carry out a return to work interview to ascertain the nature of the illness and whether they are fully recovered or if it's part of an ongoing condition. This should help you determine next steps. You might also ask for medical evidence from either a GP or an occupational health assessor. If you have reason to believe that someone's sickness is not genuine, for example, someone has brought to your attention that they've posted lots of photographs on Facebook of them having a lovely time on holiday, you might need to investigate the allegations of misconduct. As part of an investigation, an employer may believe that the best way to prove the employee is malingering is to get audio, photographic or video evidence that they are doing activities which conflict with their claims. If you suspect an employee is malingering, you shouldn't use social media sites to stalk employees and dig out as much dirt as possible. You should only seek targeted and relevant information. Let's not forget, the Information Commissioner's Office guidance is that employee practices say that it will be rare for this sort of covert surveillance, so not telling the employee what you're doing, to be justified and should only be used in exceptional circumstances. Any video, audio or photographs should be shown to the employee for their comment. This allows the employee the opportunity to give an explanation for what could be seen as very damaging evidence. Only once you've carried out the investigation and have credible evidence can you proceed to a disciplinary hearing. But in reality, what can you do if an employee is pulling a sickie after a holiday request has been denied? Well, employees may be quite disgruntled if their request for leave was rejected, and they may be tempted to take the time off anyway. In this case, well, what do you do? Here are 3 key steps. Prevention is key. Make sure your annual leave policy makes it clear that employees should request leave and get it approved before booking any holidays. You should encourage employees to book early to avoid disappointment and to collaborate with each other to coordinate leave. Make sure you consistently hold return to work interviews after each period of absence. If people are aware that it is company policy and that it's always going to be followed, it may help deter people from pulling sickies. After all, nobody wants to face any intense questioning after they return to work. You should keep accurate records of these interviews as well, because it should help you identify patterns and trends. Address the rumours. If you've heard through the grapevine that they intend to call in sick, you should hold a meeting with them to discuss what's come to your attention and whether there's any truth to the rumour. You should also remind them that any unauthorised absences may result in disciplinary action. This can often do the trick and deter them from feigning sickness to get the desired time off. My expert tip: in your employee handbook, you should have a provision regarding how employees who deliberately fail to attend work without proper excuse are in breach of management instructions will be committing an act of potential gross misconduct, which could result in dismissal without notice or payment in lieu. Finally, take action. If they have gone ahead and called in sick, you should carry out your return to work interview to probe into the reasons for the absence. Perhaps rather than openly accuse them, you should raise the issue that it could be seen as not genuine absence, as it occurred at the same time as when they wanted to go on holiday. So, moving on, how do I calculate holiday pay? Well, holiday pay has been the subject to a number of cases before the UK and European courts recently. It is an area which is constantly evolving and changing. Therefore, it's important that employers keep up to date with developments. The general rule is that for employees with fixed working hours, holiday pay amounts to their weekly normal pay. For employees whose hours differ from week to week, holiday pay will be calculated on the average pay the employee earned in the previous 12 weeks in which they were paid. Remember, for a worker on a 0 hours contract, for example, there may be a week when they haven't worked at all. If that's the case, you need to count back a week to ensure that the rate is based on 12 weeks in which they were actually paid. Now, what about overtime? Well, the case of Dudley Metropolitan Borough Council and Willits, it actually concluded that voluntary overtime that is regularly worked should be included when working out an employee's holiday pay. In this first binding decision, the EAT, or Employment Appeals Tribunal, made the following points. Payments for overtime, whether that be compulsory, non-guaranteed or voluntary, constitute pay as a matter of UK and EU law. For a payment to count as normal, it must have been paid over a sufficient period of time. This excludes payments which are not usually paid or are exceptional or made on an ad hoc basis. By way of an example, payments made 1 week each month or 1 week in every 5 weeks, even if it is not paid more frequently or even each week, may amount to a sufficient period of time to count as normal. This applies to the 20 days leave provided by European law, not the additional 8 days prescribed by the UK working time regulations. Remember, the general principle is that a holiday pay should amount to the employee's weekly normal pay. Now, what about commission? Does commission need to be included as part of holiday pay? In the case of Lock and British Gas, it confirmed that regular commission payments and allowances that are inherently linked to the performance of an employee's role should be included when calculating holiday pay. What the case didn't clear up, though, was what reference period was to be used. It is thought that a 12-week period should be used. However, if this isn't representative of the employee's normal pay, you should perhaps consider using 12 months. But as it stands, what could possibly change? Well, over the summer, the Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices was published, touching on a wide range of areas of employment law, including holiday pay. In the 116-page Government Commission review, it suggested that the pay reference period should be increased from 12 to 52 weeks in cases of casual and zero-hours employees. It also says that individuals should be given the choice of whether they receive rolled-up holiday pay. This involves not paying holiday pay while the employee is on leave, but paying the employee an extra amount during the weeks that the employee works. This practice has not been recommended by ACAS or the government in the past. So we'll now have to wait and see how the government responds to those proposals. My expert tip? We send our clients monthly bulletins with all the latest HR and employment law news and regularly update the news pages on our website with legislative updates, guides, frequently asked questions, case analysis, government announcements. And so do contact us to find out how you can stay up to date. So, to summarise then, some things for you to take away. Full-time employees have the right to 5.6 weeks of paid annual leave per year. Employees do not have a statutory right to take time off on bank holidays or to be paid extra if they do work one, although a bit of a flag, make sure you check your contracts and employee handbooks. Annual leave begins to accrue from the employee's first day of employment, not having completed their probationary period. And employees within their rights to provide notice to an employee that they are to take leave on particular days that suit the business. Don't forget, employers can refuse a request for holiday on specific dates or cancel leave that has already been approved by providing the required amount of notice. And finally, if an employee is unable to take leave because they've been on sick, they can carry over up to 20 days into the next leave year. And if the employee becomes sick before or during a pre-arranged holiday, they are entitled to postpone their annual leave to another date. We've had a lot of discussions today in respect of annual leave. So if you'd like a detailed overview of what we've been talking about, do check out our ebook. It's filled with all the information you need to know about annual leave and has lots of expert tips and helpful hints. In your follow-up email, you'll be able to see where you can access that information. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Thanks so much for joining me. I really enjoyed having you on board. If you've got any questions, then do pop them in the questions section and we'll be able to come back to you after the event. At EW, our employment law advisors and health and safety consultants are on hand to help you understand your legal obligations and make any process easier and smoother. And so if you've got any questions today about our services generally, then do get in touch. Our contact details are right there for you and they'll be in our follow-up email after this webinar. Thanks so much.